I'm also joined by Emmanuel Navon, who's an analyst. He's an Israeli political scientist and foreign policy expert and teaches at the Tel Aviv University. Mr. Navon, thank you for joining us. Tell me, this was a targeted assassination. What's the legal justification behind this under international law?
So, as you might be aware, international law allows the preemptive elimination of terrorists that are on their way to committing acts of terrorism.
Which particular clause of international law allows that, Mr. Navon? Which particular clause of international law?
In other words, when you have a ticking bomb in international law, you are entitled, you asked me a question of law, so I'm answering you. In international law, when you face a ticking bomb, you are entitled to eliminate that ticking bomb. And Israel used its right in international law by eliminating this dangerous terrorist.
No, Mr. Navon, I said which particular article or clause of international law allows this preemption that you're talking about?
So the law of warfare is not only the Geneva Convention, but also many decisions of the International Court of Justice, the practice of NATO in Afghanistan, for example.
No, the practice of NATO, Mr. Navon, the practice of NATO is an issue of operational realpolitik. It's not about the provisions of law. As far as my information and meager knowledge goes, because there can be no limiting principle, there is no provision in international law that allows preemptive assassination.
Article 51 of the United Nations Charter talks about self-defense, and this is an act of self-defense.
Article 51 talks about self-defense, does not talk about preemption because there is a moral hazard involved there. But let me move on to another issue here, which is about the fact that Israel is essentially without a government for the last 7 months. Mr. Netanyahu is there as a caretaker. 2 elections down, there's still no signs of putting together a government. And Mr. Netanyahu, as you know, is also facing charges of graft, fraud, and breach of trust. And there are pre-trial hearings going on, and the indictment will be in December. It seems to me, from where I stand, that this looks to be more like wag the dog situation. In order to change the conversation, you decide that you want to take out an Islamic Jihad leader.
Look, it's an interesting conspiracy theory which has been aired by many people also in Israel, not only around the world. But the fact is that Abu Atta was the head of Islamic Jihad, that he had committed himself many terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians, that he was on his way of committing more terrorist attacks. His elimination had been decided by the Israeli Security Cabinet 2 weeks ago. And the army decided that this was the right time to eliminate him while limiting the casualties around him. So when it comes, true politics is generally a cynical business, but when it comes to national security,
so you believe that the analysts, forget about around the world, but you believe that the analysts in Israel who are saying that this is a masterstroke by Netanyahu to change the nature of the conversation are essentially conspiracy theorists?
Well, which analysts are you talking about?
I mean, I was reading the Israeli newspapers. I was reading the Financial Times, the people who are talking about this. So I'm just asking you the question, forget about who is saying this, but you think that whoever is saying this is a conspiracy theorist. Have I heard you correctly?
I give credit to the Prime Minister of Israel that when it comes to Israel's national security, he does not put his personal survival before the interests of the country, yes.
Okay, that's great, because he has, by this masterstroke, actually forced his main rival, Benny Gantz, to also say that it was a correct decision. And Benny Gantz, of course, as you know, is a former IDF chief. And even though he's politically the rival, he was left with no room at all but to say that this was a correct decision. I mean, what else can be called a masterstroke?
Well, Benny Gantz said this because it is the truth. It was the right decision. And therefore, what I'm trying to explain to you is that in Israel, it's not a matter of right and left. There is a wide consensus that this was an act of self-defense that was justified. And this opinion is shared by most people, both on right and left. And the reason why Benny Gantz and Netanyahu before him are having trouble forming a coalition has nothing to do with the tension with Gaza. It has simply to do with the fact that the results of the previous elections in September did not produce a clear majority, neither for the right nor for the left.
Okay. Final question, Mr. Navon, since you are a political scientist. I'm sure that you are aware of the issue of moral hazard in preemptions and preventive actions. To me, as a minor student of political science, it seems that the Israeli action falls in the category of that moral hazard. What do you have to say about that? I know that you've quoted Article 51, but I think there is a problem there because Article 51 does not clearly allow preemption or preventive actions.
Well, the international law does actually allow preemptive action. That is for a fact. I quoted Article 51 because it's a general principle of international law, and eliminating a ticking bomb, in my opinion, in my view, is an act of self-defense.
Okay, Mr. Navon,
and, Israel has been waiting for many weeks.
Did you ever get to watch that American film called Minority Report?
I was in the middle of saying that Israel did everything it could to make a minimum amount of collateral victims. By the way, Israel is much more careful comparatively than NATO armies in Afghanistan and elsewhere. So when you use
now we are putting numbers on. So now we are putting numbers on human tragedy.
Because I am comparing Israel to democratic countries and not to countries that do not respect the rules of law. We respect the rules of the law and the rule of war, just like.
And those laws.
Yes, I am comparing.
Okay. Anyway, so Israel respects the rules of law rather than, in fact, the interpretation of those laws according to Israel is more like it. Thank you. That was Emmanuel Navon speaking with us from